Welcome to another OU Insider Under the Visor Sooners podcast. My name is Brandon Drumm. I'm here with Parker Thune, and we have a special guest, Jason Belzer, CEO of it's Student Life. Is that what you said? Student
Student
Life,
athlete NIL.
Student Athlete NIL, CEO of Student Athlete NIL. Also helps runs Crimson and Cream Collective for you Sooners fans. That is. Yeah, we got a big guest. I mean, it's awesome. We're going to get to break down all the NIL questions that you Sooners fans have been asking on our board and all that type of stuff. It's going to be really, really big here. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen.
All right, Parker, do you want to start out with the question? Do you want me to
Well,
start
sure.
out?
I mean, let's start with the most obvious question, Jason, the one that everybody is asking. Why is OU broke?
That's a good question. So the first answer to that would be that OU is not broke.
You don't say.
Yeah, we are. So to give your listeners some color, Student Athlete NIL Sunil, the company that I am CEO of that runs Crimson and Cream, is an agency that works with more than 40 different institutions across the country. We run more than 40 collectives. Oklahoma and Crimson and Cream is our largest, but we work with schools like Vanderbilt, Rutgers, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, Syracuse. And so we launched Crimson and Cream about a year and a half ago in October of 2022. And I can sit here today and tell you that Crimson and Cream is the best managed collective in the country, operationally has the best infrastructure, and has also generated more commercial dollars. And what we talk about commercial dollars, we talk about brand partnership dollars, traditional advertising opportunities with student athletes and brands, as well as memberships than any other collective in the country. So that's that piece. And we know that because we run so many collectives and we have insights into what's happening. We have also been very successful on the donor side. We have gone out and we're able to connect with the right people within the Oklahoma community to be able to go out and create a very, very competitive NIL program for the Sooners. Last year, based on what was deployed by every collective in the country, the Sooners had one of the best return on investments for their football team of really anybody. And you know, there's some subjectivity to that, there's some objectivity to that, but based on where the Sooners finished in the polls and how much was deployed, I think we did a very good job. Part of that is, again, because we work with so many schools and have so many collectives, we know exactly what every student athlete's market value is from an NIL perspective. So just as an example, when we were coming to the end of last season, so basically in December, we had already prepared a report of every single Oklahoma student athlete on the football roster and what their value was going to be in the portal for December and January. And we were able then to go back to every single player and allow them to know that this is what we believe you're worth. This is what we're going to be willing to offer you. And there's not really a whole lot of negotiation, because if you think you can get a lot more in the portal, have fun, right? And go do that, because we know that we can get a comparably similar player out of the portal for this money or less. And if you notice, we knew DG was going to go to into the portal. That was a foregone conclusion. I think everybody sensed that. Mm-hmm. You know, Dylan got paid 7 figures at Oregon, and he deserves every penny of that. But that is not what we were trying to accomplish. We knew that we had Jackson Arnold, and we had to take care of him. And we were able to keep pretty much every player that we expected to have. We had one player leave. That was a little bit of an unexpected situation, but I can tell you that he was compensated 5x what we had offered him. And that's not worth busting your entire payroll for one player. So, and I'm happy to go into detail on that as well. But
okay, Let's go there.
And the last thing before you go, Brandon,
Okay.
Oklahoma will deploy a top 15 NIL pool for football this year, guaranteed. I mean, it might actually be top 10. So there is no scenario where we are broke. It is not only are we deploying it, but we're deploying it in the most efficient way possible of any school because of the data that we bring to the table.
I want to get into all that because there is several nuggets that you threw out there that I want to touch on, but I think the fans listening right now are going to, okay, everybody knows the player's name. I'll say it, you don't have to say it. Caden Green.
Yes.
So that whole situation, you know, there were rumors out there that you guys compensated him like a All-American offensive tackle, and then some other collectives, schools, whatever, or the other school came in and threw out 5 times, as you just said, more than market value.
Yep.
And that's something I want to get across to you, or across to the fan base is when I say you, across to the fan base, is that was one of the most wild things that I had ever covered. Parker and I, we were just baffled at what some other school was willing to throw out. He's a great player, but are you willing to give up everybody else and lose other starters, multiple starters on both sides of the ball for one dude?
That's right.
That's the biggest thing. So number one, can you walk us through the drama behind the scenes with all that? And two, is this essentially ran like an NFL, like a general manager would run an NFL? You have such money that you want to accrue to the roster. You got to pay 100 guys at Oklahoma. You have this much money, make it work. Is that kind of how it works now?
That's exactly how it is. And again, that's exactly how you want your model to look like. We all know what college athletics looks like today. We all know where it's headed. And so we have built an infrastructure where the best comparison is, yes, it's almost like an NFL front office. And it's more like baseball than it is football in the sense that every team has a different salary pool. So there's no cap, right? So I'll start off by saying that if anyone wants to know what we value players, I had posted on December 3rd, if you go to my Twitter profile, you will see what our grades were for, or ranges for, how much every athlete is worth on a median perspective. So you can know exactly what we came in and offered folks and said, this is what we believe. Now, it's not a, this is exactly it. There's obviously a little bit of margin, and there's always conversations. People have different needs, but you can kind of tell where we are. Let me lay the groundwork for last year. And I've been on the record with this, but it seems that it hasn't gone out there. Last year, we gave every single football player at least $26,000. Every single scholarship athlete on the roster got $26,000, 85 guys. The average was closer to $45,000.
Mm-hmm.
We deployed a little bit over $4 million. So that gives you your kind of anchor point to say, where did OU finish? How much did we give, right? I can tell you that, and we don't work with them, but I know for a fact that schools like Miami put out a lot more money than $4 million and finished a lot worse than where Oklahoma did. There's plenty of other schools. And so the margins are thin, right? Like the difference between a 10, 11, and 12 win season, there's so many other factors that go into that. We know that Texas A&M deployed a lot of money and they didn't have a very good season, right? So we think about it from a return on investment standpoint. So as it relates to this past year, when it came to Caden, or it comes to Billy Bowman or Danny Stutzman or Jackson Arnold or any of the other great players on the team, or anybody, we came in and we said, this is what we believe your market value is, based again on, and if I'm sure you guys play fantasy football, it's a common term, value over replacement, right? VOR. What's your value over replacement? What's a similar type of athlete? Now, there are intangibles that go into that because, consistency matters, culture matters. And I can tell you, and why I love working with Oklahoma, is that OU has maybe the greatest football culture and locker room that I've ever seen. I played football at Rutgers, and I played for Coach Greg Schiano, but what Brent and his staff do and the soul mission is incredible. And everybody knows that, and this is one of the cool pieces of this, and this is not something that we see really anywhere else. And I'm being fully transparent here, is the guys that are making the most money at Oklahoma know that they could potentially make more on the open market, but they've chosen to sacrifice and take less because they want everyone on the team to have something. Which is why we're one of the only teams that actually gives everybody, I think we have the highest quote unquote base NIL compensation of any school. There might be, I can tell you right now, Ole Miss is probably spending more money, but it's concentrated at the top versus everybody getting something. So there's value to that. And if you want to have the type of program where you recruit really good players and retain them, which is exactly what Oklahoma has done the last 2 years for the most part, that's what you need, right? You need everybody to be bought into that type of opportunity. So when it came to Caden, just like everybody else, we presented him with a contract for the coming year. We can do that under the rules from a retention standpoint. He was still under contract with us. He was, he didn't really say a lot to us, which is fine, right? You're still in the middle of the season. We have a bowl game coming up. And when he did respond to us, and this all happened within the course of really a couple of days, he basically said that he wanted substantially more money. And we looked at it and we said, you know what? Okay, we'll go out and we're not going to give you what you are asking, but we're willing to come up. And we basically came close to matching what he had asked. And then he sort of said, you know what, I'm going to go into the portal or whatever. And it was done. Right. So we were not in control. Right. At the end of the day, we can only have those conversations. That being said, I can tell you, and I don't mind saying this on the record, there was some substantial tampering that was occurring with him. And there was tampering that was occurring with his direct, I believe his father is really his agent. I don't know if he actually has an agent directly that's working with him, but there were conversations that were happening with him while he was still a student athlete. He wasn't in the portal. We saw a lot of that this year, which is unfortunate. And I can tell you that Oklahoma and the coaching staff does not do that. They don't operate from that perspective. Kid goes in the portal, we can have a conversation. We're not trying to poach players. We're not trying to do that. And we have a policy, not only at OU, but at all of our institutions, that we don't talk to kids unless they're in the portal. And at that point, and again, honestly, if I go to a kid and say, maybe we have a kid at Georgia Tech as an example, we'll go in and we'll say, this is what you're worth. And this is what Georgia Tech is willing to pay you. And if you want to go and get that money from another school, that's up to you. But don't think that you're going to go get 2 or 3x. And in most cases, student athletes are not getting 2 or 3x somewhere unless somebody is willing to substantially overpay them in that process. So it was unfortunate. I mean, if you want to ask me what really happened, is that he the whole time had no intention of staying at Oklahoma. And he decided that he was going to go. And I think he was just using Crimson and Cream as potentially leverage to get even more from somebody else.
That's intense.
Yeah, that's hardball right there. Jason, I think now would be a good juncture. It's a juncture where a lot of listeners are probably wondering, hey, can you elaborate a little bit more on your comment about tampering? Because it's kind of an open secret. It happens across college football, right? And I guess my question to you is, everybody has their own opinions on it, but as somebody who deals in this game, how difficult do you think it already is and is going to be moving forward to regulate and rein some of that in?
So I think that if, depending on what happens with this Tennessee, Virginia case and the temporary restraining order that may go into effect as early as next week, it's going to be even more chaotic. That being said, I believe that we are really and it might be even faster. I think by the end of this year, we're going to have some sort of structure around rules, potentially collective bargaining. If it's not in an employee-employer situation, then it is something, because it is severely undermining the ability for college sports and college athletics to put out a competitive product. The reason why the NFL is such an amazing product is because there are guardrails, there are rules. You don't tamper. Guys are under contract. You have to, you have your first contract, then you become a free agent. And that's what creates the parity in the league. But in this situation, what's occurring is that the top schools, and what I mean by the top schools are the most well-funded, are essentially just robbing each other of talent. That's what's happening here, right? We have what is effectively a cartel, which is the NCAA, which has put in essentially these, monopolistic rules, right? These rules that would never pass antitrust scrutiny, and which is why they're getting tossed out by every court, restricting player movement. And the cartel is slowly cracking. I mean, it's near completely breaking apart. And the biggest schools with the biggest war chests are essentially accumulating all of this talent. And we see that in particular because next year is the college football's playoffs expansion. And so if you're an Ole Miss or a Missouri, there actually is an argument to go put in 10, 15, 20 million dollars, whatever it is. Because if you make the playoff, you're going to make that money back in spades, right?
Yeah.
And so that's essentially what's happening. The unfortunate part of that, to me, especially somebody that has worked in college athletics for 20 years, is I still believe in integrity. If I'm a coach, I still believe in playing by the rules. But what I can tell you is that there are coaches at P4 programs that they don't give a shit, right? They're going to go and they're going to do whatever they want. And, I have a very close relationship with the NCAA. I speak with their enforcement staff all the time. We are an open book. We're 100% transparent. So Oklahoma knows everything that we're doing, and that's part of our standard operating procedure. And I've also been very transparent with the NCAA. And they have told me that they have numerous text messages chains between Division I, FBS, P5, P4 football head coaches and student athletes that are on rosters, not in the portal. Like, it's not even like a clandestine thing. It's not even like somebody going and buying a burner phone and getting their Connor Stallions to go make a conversation about poaching a kid. It's like happening out in the open. And they are doing this because they know that NCAA has no legitimate enforcement power. They just can't deal with it right now. And 5 years ago, this is crazy. And so, it's another conversation for why the NCAA is coming down on the schools that they are. But the NCAA is in an existential situation right now, and they're doing whatever they can to fight for their survival. And we'll see whether or not they make it through this.
Okay. You brought it up and it was on my mind before you even said anything. I want to piggyback off that. Is there a world where, number one, the NCAA is around 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 1 year from now? And number two, you talked about the tampering. You talked about the court with Tennessee and Virginia and all of that. Where does that, with the rulings, and you talked about from a year from now being, there's going to be maybe even in-house, NIL and all that type of stuff. Where does that put the collectives through all this? It's kind of a two-part question, but where are the collectives that you run a year, two from now, after all these hearings are heard and the changes that you think are coming down the road happen? And where's the NCAA in all of this?
Both really good questions. So I can tell you that even in the worst case scenario, the NCAA will continue to exist, but it will exist to help govern and administer their championships for the smaller schools, That's sort of like their worst case scenario, right? Because Division III, Division II, mid majors, they're not playing in this game, right?
Mhm.
So that's that. For the P4s, the Big Ten, the SEC, does it make sense to completely reinvent the wheel? You still need somebody to do the championships. You still need somebody to, you still have to have some rules. And so my sense is that whatever happens, and we heard the Big Ten and the SEC kind of getting into bed with each other last week, what I think is going to happen is they're going to come up with these new sets of rules, and they're going to go to the NCAA and they're going to say, this is what we want. This is how we're going to operate. Either you can be the ones that help enforce that for us, or we're going to just go break off and do our own thing. They're going to give the NCAA an ultimatum. And the NCAA might say, okay. I mean, I think they pretty much have to say, okay, because otherwise, where's the money going to come?
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, because why, again, you're going to have to create structure. There's people that do all these different things. It's a lot of work. And how do you manage that process? It's not like you can go create the staff overnight to do all of these different things, the scheduling and the championships and the negotiations and the TV rights. I mean, there's going to be a process that's going to unfold, and it's a lot easier to reform an organization and maybe even gut it if that's what you have to do than it is to completely rebuild something from scratch. As it relates to the collectives, again, I can only speak for the collectives that we operate versus the ones that are independently run. As it relates to the ones that are independently run, the vast majority of them will likely disappear or be absorbed in some capacity. And what I mean by that is the way that we operate right now is that we look at it as though we work for the University of Oklahoma. We are, even though we don't have a contract with the university, but we are fully transparent in what we do. They know everything, that every dollar that comes in, every dollar that goes out. They know every donor that puts money in. They know I don't know if you guys are members of Crimson and Cream, but if you are, the university knows that Parker and Brandon are members of Crimson and Cream. And we've done that because we know that it's inevitable and it's likely going to happen very soon that the university, once this is deregulated, is going to be able to come to us and say, now we can work together. Now we can sign a contract. And essentially, Crimson and Cream will just become and Sunil becomes a third party, no different than what Learfield does with the university. You manage on the player personnel side. Because you still need somebody that's going to pay the players, negotiate with the agents, monetize these athletes. And that's what we do. I mean, we're going to have, as an example, we're working on we have a camps division, and we're going to be doing football camps and softball camps with the athletes this year. We just did one at Alabama with Jalen Milroe. We had 600 kids, right? We're having conversations with every other major P4 program about that. So that's all what's going to happen. This whole concept of coming in-house for the independent collectives that have no infrastructure, sure, because it's run by the alumni that's also an insurance broker or a salesman that's doing this part-time. But at Oklahoma, we have a machine in Crimson and Cream. So it doesn't make any sense for the university to try to blow that up. And it is unlikely that that's what's going to happen. So for the average fan, it's not going to change. And our goal is to be able to create an opportunity and a club for every Oklahoma fan to be able to access the athletes and engage in Oklahoma sports and Sooner sports in a way that never has been done before. And I'll just give you an example. In the next few months, we're going to be launching essentially an OTT platform that's going to be like the Netflix of Sooner sports. And that's a partnership with us and Learfield to create really awesome behind the scenes content. I mean, think about, like, we're talking about literally like Jackson Arnold mic'd up during games, like those types of cool things. That's what Crimson and Cream is going to be. And that's what the future of collective should be. It should be the arm of these athletes that you wouldn't be able to get access to. That's a little bit still separated from the university because, OU is conservative. They're not going to necessarily want all of those pieces. That's what we're working on. And that is what the future of NIL is. These athletes are going to continue to get paid, and we got to figure out how to drive revenue and monetize those rights. And it's easiest done with somebody that can go do that at scale and has a playbook that can just go in and operationalize that.
I have another question because the fans are going to want me to ask this one. Okay, so you brought up Miami. You've talked about some of these schools, Miami, Mississippi, Missouri, that just throw just I almost want to say a curse word here, crap tons of money
Yep.
at players. And that's because you saw the $12 million endowment to a collective at Missouri just yesterday. And we say Oklahoma's not poor, but do they have enough donors? Does Oklahoma have enough money to go play ball the way that those schools want to play ball? Like, is that truthfully available at Oklahoma right now?
So I will say that, and again, truthfully and in transparency, this year we're going to be okay. But in order for Oklahoma to remain competitive long term in the SEC, we are going to need the fan base to help get behind Crimson and Cream. That is the only way. I can't give you any guarantee past 2024. Why? Because every school is functioning from donor, or it's dealing with donor fatigue already. But when you have a deeper donor base, it helps, right? There's more people to draw from. And so we're going to have to get more creative, and we're going to have to really drive and sort of crowdfund that revenue in order to be successful. Oklahoma has great tradition. There's amazing allegiance. The student athletes, when we go talk to brands, people are all over Oklahoma. They love it. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But if you're going to be in a scenario where you are paying, I mean, the average SEC team is paying about $8 million this year on their payroll.
Mm-hmm.
There are schools that are paying up to 12, right? So it's sort of that, but that 8 to 10 million. But if we have a bargaining situation, it could be even higher. It could be even bigger. It could be 20 million. And so can OU afford to do that without help from the fan base? I don't know. And they're going to be very hard decisions that schools are going to have to make as it relates to Olympic sports. Because if I got to go pay my football team 20 or $30 million, well, I can't have track and field. I can't have softball, right? Like,
donors only have so much money.
Well, donors only have so much money unless we generate new revenue from that perspective. So the short answer is that we have a runway, and that runway may be only 11 months to figure this out for OU in order to make sure that over the long run, they can remain highly competitive in this space. Because the Alabamas and LSUs and Georgias of the world, they're all in. And the Ole Misses, and there's going to be an opportunity because of the money that's coming in from the SEC, from more money into the school means more opportunity. But that's why there are schools that are having conversations with private equity firms, because they're trying to figure out how can we afford to continue to do this moving forward. I mean, there's a reason why the Florida State and now UNC are like, we're screwed if we stay in the ACC, because the SEC is getting 20 or $30 million more for their media rights, and we aren't, and we got to go pay $10 million for our football team at the same time. It's a hard nut to have to crack.
Yeah. Oh, well, sorry, Parker. One more, because I want to piggyback off that real quick. You said, you talked about playing the SEC, and these programs are all in. Alabama, all of them, LSU, whatever. Is this kind of a scenario where you feel that, and you say like you don't know, maybe 11 months down the road, but after Oklahoma plays in the SEC for a season, the fan base and the donors alike, the big money people go, okay, we get it. Now we've got to start doing this like the right way, like already doing it the right way, but even more so than before.
I mean, the short answer is yes. I think there's really two outcomes here, right? I mean, maybe there's three. Is outcome number one is that they go into the SEC and get their butts kicked, which I don't think is going to happen, because I think we have a really good roster. But then again, some of those SEC schools have really good rosters too, even better rosters. The other element is that we kick butt, and I don't know how the fan base reacts either way. My hope was that they were going to be more enthusiastic after this season. I think that the average fan, and this is just an education thing, is that they're sort of spoiled, right? Like when you produce, multiple college football playoff appearances and Heisman winners. They're like, yeah, they'll figure it out. It's a machine. When in reality, it's not so simple.
Yeah.
But I also realized that one of the reasons why OU is all in this season to what OU can do, right? They are all in, and they know that because they also realize that if they weren't all in, to go into the SEC and go 4-8 is a disaster. Because when you got to rebuild and you have nothing, man, oh man, is that hard. Once you're in the hole, you are in the hole. And the reality is, like, you just do the math, like OU, Texas. Think about the sizes of the fan base. Think about all those different things. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, we need OU and the average fan to step up and be part of this, because Texas has 3x the number of alumni, right? And just, it's a numbers game at that point.
This episode of the OU Insider Under the Visor podcast is brought to you by Manscaped. It's time for the ultimate face-off. The Beard Bowl is here. As the two best teams square off to see who the champion of facial fuzz is, our friends at Manscaped are prepping everything you need for game day. Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit is the MVP of facial grooming, offering precision trimming, water-resistant technology, and enough styling options to outplay any opponent. And guess what? You can join the winning team along with the 10 million men who already trust Manscaped with our special offer. Don't let your beard be benched. It deserves the spotlight on the biggest stage. Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit is the ultimate franchise player to take your grooming game to the end zone. This package has made it easier than ever to craft your signature look with ease. Featuring the Beard Hedger cordless trimmer, it packs one guard with 20 different lengths. That's right, no more messy drawers full of guards. It's time to move the sticks from your old beard razor. Look and feel ready for the big game every day with Manscaped's beard formulations, including beard balm, beard oil, shampoo, and conditioner. So get 20% off and free shipping with our code OU Insider at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com with our code OU Insider. Gear up for the real halftime show where your beard takes center stage.
So I want to hit on two things that you referenced earlier, Jason. One of those things being donor fatigue. And you mentioned all the other collectives that you deal with. And obviously the NIL era is still very new, and Oklahoma maybe isn't dealing with it as much as some other schools. But when you say donor fatigue, what does that look like? What does that stem from? And what is the ROI on these particular players that donors are effectively being asked to invest in? How is that impacting donor fatigue? And then the second part of my question is, we're accustomed to throwing around the term P5, right? Power 5, the Power 5 conferences in college football. We've gotten to a point, and you mentioned it earlier, where we're down to a P4. The Pac-12 is out of the picture. So where is all of these new realities in college football? Where are they leading us in terms of further consolidation of conference alignment?
Sure. So as it relates to donor fatigue, there are donors that give substantial amount of money to the school every year. And that could be anywhere between $10,000, $100,000, $1 million. We all know that if you're wealthy and you have X number of dollars in the bank and you're just getting 5% interest on it, that's a lot of money that can go back to the school. The problem is the school has a lot of needs. They need to build new buildings. They need to invest. They need to pay coaching salaries. And so if you come to a donor, what NIL has been is, it's not an or. It's not give to this or give to that. It's an and. It's like, we need you to step up even more. And some people are like, I can't do this anymore. And the other problem is, if I give X number of dollars to a player and then you guys don't have a good season or the kid sucks, well, then my money, I literally could have just burned my money. Whereas if I gave it to the school, at least I get my name on a building or a brick or something, right? Like, and so that is a really hard value proposition for the schools to have to deal with. And you can see it. People just don't want to do it. Now, the schools that have been able to say, hey, this worked, we were able to be successful, that was helpful. Like if OU won 5 games this year, I don't know if we would have been able to turn around and go ask people to step up for the SEC. And you're in a deep problem. That's sort of the problem at Miami, right? Is like they put all this money in and they go and win 7 games and lose to Rutgers, my alma mater, which literally probably had an NIL payroll that was 6 or 7 times less than what Miami was playing with. So that's a big challenge. And so we have to create a more sustainable path for these programs to generate additional revenue through NIL. And so that is the whole concept of the membership program, is to say, when I look at an OU fan, I want to be able to tell them, if you pay $10 or $20 a month, I want you to look at that as though it's your Netflix subscription or your Costco membership. I want you to get real value out of that. But I also want you to know that it's helping achieve what you want, which is helping Oklahoma Athletics succeed in their programs. As it relates to the future, there will likely be more consolidation. I think a lot of this is the conferences, and the NCAA is certainly not in control. And in some ways, the conferences are not in control. It's all going to depend on what happens in these courts. I mean, look, literally just as yesterday, Dartmouth basketball was ruled to be employees. What happens next week, right? What happens with the USC case and the NLRB? If there has to be collective bargaining at an employee-employer situation, which is very conceivable at this point, college athletics will look very, very different. And what it will be is that football will have to essentially be spun off. When you have an employee-employer situation, Title IX no longer applies, which means that it automatically opens up the gate for schools to be able to slash non-revenue sports, and those would be women's sports. And so it's very hard for me to make a prediction outside of there will certainly be revenue share. And NIL is really revenue share and just another name at this point, right? Because, you know, if SEC team is deploying $10 million for their players, I could maybe make the argument that 3 or 4 million of that is really true NIL in terms of recoupable NIL value. Mm-hmm. And the other money is just roster value, right? It's you play for Alabama or Texas or whatever, and this is what we're basically sharing revenue with you at that point.
So you talked about the in-house and all of that with Dartmouth. Is that something we're going to see like in the very near future that you believe? Like you said, at the end of the day, you know, maybe 9, 10, 11 months down the road, you could be looking at something completely different. Is this where you think college is headed? Like in-house NIL, like 100%, no ifs, ands, or buts. That's where it's headed.
100%. There is no doubt, right? There is no doubt that it is highly likely that we're headed towards an employee-employer situation. There are complexities and nuances with that because Dartmouth is a private institution versus Oklahoma, which is a public institution. Some states are not right-to-work states, right? So like the South is in a different case than the Northeast. But the irony is people don't realize this is like, you know, how much is a Dartmouth basketball player worth? I mean, he's worth minimum wage. To just be honest, right? They're going to get $15 an hour. But what they're trying to do is not necessarily say, pay me. It's more about if I'm a Dartmouth athlete, I don't want to have to go play, you know, UCLA. Like, I don't want to have to travel across the country. I want to go, you know, I want to go to class. I want to be able to do those things. So there's that piece. But for the P4 athletes, hell yeah, I want revenue. And in the NBA and the NFL, they're getting half. How is that going to work? It's not like the schools are not going to be able to dictate that. If the kids organize and collectively bargain, they can demand whatever they want. And if Oklahoma wants to continue to have football and basketball, they're going to have to deal with it. It just is what it is. And, you know, I think sometimes everyone thinks like, oh, that won't happen or it'll take a long time. Like it could very well happen next year. And college athletics looks completely different. And it's just unfortunate, but that's where we've reached. And there's no one to blame but the higher ups in this business, primarily the NCAA, for not figuring this out earlier.
Go ahead, Parker.
I was just going to say, looping back around to the issue of buy-in from the fans. Jason, I'm curious as to what your response, what your rejoinder would be to, and we see this a lot on message boards, on social media and elsewhere. The average fan who buys season tickets and already donates to the university what they can. And their quandary, if you will, is, okay, I already do this. I show up for this. I take time and money and resources to support OU at football games, basketball games, softball games, etc. Now you're asking me to donate to NIL on top of that. There's only so much I can do. What would be your response to a predicament like that?
Yeah, so if you just think about it objectively, again, as an average fan, imagine if your business, the company that you work for, all of a sudden their expenses increase by 20%. What options do they have at that point? Their first option is to fire people, right? To reduce their overhead. And their second option is to raise their prices. I mean, we just saw it the last 2 years with inflation. And so what these schools are doing is they're saying, well, before we start firing people, and what we really mean by firing people is cutting sports, because that's where you're going to be able to make the biggest roundup. We're going to raise our prices. And what we're essentially doing is we're not raising the season ticket price. We're asking you to give to the collective, because we got to figure out how to close that gap. But that may not be enough, right? At some point, they may need to cut staff and figure out the nexus. And, you know, I've told every AD in the country, literally, I've told this to Joe Castiglione. I've said, you have to tell your coaching staff, no more hiring, you know, analysts, no more doing this. Like, stop spending money and figure out how to fund your NIL program. Period. End the story. Because we have to pay the labor, and the bill is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So how could you turn around and say, yeah, we can go hire more support staff? That's not realistic. And I don't disagree with you, but that's a big chunk of money. And don't forget, these are nonprofits that have lived in a world where every dollar that comes in goes out. They're not budgeting. They're just like, oh, we have 100 million to spend this year. We're spending 100 million. We're not holding money in the bank, right? And so all of a sudden I increase by 10 or 20%. Where are they getting this money? They don't have a choice. Some schools, they just don't spend, right? Like my alma mater doesn't have that money. So they're not spending, and you get performance that's commensurate with it. So
the interesting part is, as you said, and you said you told Josie this, stop hiring analysts, stop doing that. And the ironic thing is the only analyst that we've seen Oklahoma hire, and normally they hire more, and that's been kind of Brent Venables' MO, is he wants the best staff. If he's got to throw another $50,000-$60,000 at, you know, a former head coach to come in that's still under contract somewhere else to come in and fill another open position, quote, quote, that they just create, you know, out of thin air, kind of like what Saban's been doing for years, right? It's the rehab program for a lot of these coaches, right? Those days are over. Like, do you feel like Venables and OU has bought into that mindset?
I do. And, you know, you used the great example of Alabama. Alabama is going to be in some pain for the next few years. And one of the reasons is that Alabama was living off of the aura of Nick Saban. And there were kids that were going to Bama, a lot of those kids that were taking a lot less money than all of these other schools because they wanted to go play for Nick Saban. And so Alabama invested into other areas. We don't have to go pay all this NIL money. We'll go hire, you know, 17 analysts that are former head coaches. And look what happened over the last 30 days, right? They lost all of their good recruits, their top players. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama is going to go 7 or 8 wins for the next few years until they figure this out. Because now they're in a tough spot, which is why I don't envy, you know, their new football coach, because, man, it's hard, right? Now, Michigan, on the other hand, they went from within, and they did that just like Ohio State did with Ryan Day a few years ago, because they got a machine, and it's like plug and play, right? The machine matters more than anything else at the end of the day. And that's what you need to be able to do in college athletics. And I think Oklahoma has had that mantra for a long time too, right? Is, you know, hire the right person, build the infrastructure. It's like the military, right? It's never about the one soldier, the one general. It's about the system that's in place, and be smart and forward thinking in that area.
Now, I'm going to present to you, Jason, another point of contention that I know fans will have, and this goes back maybe 20 or 30 minutes into this discussion, but I think it bears revisiting. And that is the issue of sustainability, because as you mentioned earlier, there are players who could potentially have gotten more on the open market, but chose instead, because of the culture that is in place at Oklahoma and the family environment, all of that, they chose to stick it out at OU and take less money to do so. And I know there are going to be fans that hear that and think, how is that going to be sustainable in the wild, wild west in college football? Whereas you mentioned the bar just continues to get raised and raised and raised in terms of how much money is required to build a roster. So what would your answer be as to the question of whether that is a sustainable model in the long term?
It's not a sustainable model, and it will not continue. We cannot have the wild, wild west, because the system will fall apart, right? And it will fall apart because of donor fatigue. It'll fall apart because of tampering. It'll fall apart because all this money is being invested. Think about this. 16 teams in the SEC next year, there will be at least $160 million. Let's just say an average of $10 million a school deployed. At the end of the year, there's going to be team finish first, and there's going to be a team finish 16th. We work with Vanderbilt. They're deploying millions. Do you think if next year Vanderbilt finishes 2-10 again, that all those donors are going to keep putting in? Not a shot. And so there has to be rules that are put in place. And in a world where there is bargaining, then it's not the Wild West anymore. It's you get X dollars for this position, or because you've been on the roster for this many years, or whatever that may be. There will be a process to that. What I am optimistic about also is that as our organization grows, our data is going to go a long way to being able to prove out what those positions are really worth. And we're already having conversations with certain powers that be about that, right? Like, how much is a quarterback at a P4 that's starting? What's the median compensation for that? Because we're going to have to figure all of that out, just like in the NFL, what a certain player is worth. And then you start building out what that looks like for your roster.
Okay. So I was talking to a source the other day, and I'll just say a coach in the industry, a P4. And I asked this question. I said, things are going to change. There's going to be caps, all this down the line. And he said, so who's going to determine what the player at a high school is worth? Because there's some high school kids, 8, 9 million, $100,000, $1 million, defensive tackles, quarterbacks, like those, they're premium positions, right? Like those are the two premium positions and offensive tackles, I guess 3 premium positions that everybody in the country wants the elite guys at. And then you have these, it's our industry where we go out in the recruiting industry and the recruiting services, and we rank the 5 stars, the 4 stars, the top 250 kids. Is there a world where, okay, cumulatively this player is, the 75th overall player in the country, he's a defensive tackle, this is what this person is worth, like kind of like in the draft,
That's exactly what a draft is, right? Like,
right. Is that where this is headed? And how would you do that? Like in your mind, how would you push that out as far as capping this player is worth, this position's worth this because it's ranked here? Does that, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, so you're going to have some sort of cap, right? In order to have a cap, you're going to need to have an antitrust exemption. The reason why Congress doesn't want to give an antitrust exemption right now is because the NCAA is trying to get an antitrust exemption to suppress NIL whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
But if it goes to an employment situation, then they will get a limited antitrust exemption, and they will make an agreement that, hey, every SEC school or school in this league, whatever that looks like, is going to have a $15 million salary cap this year. And the schools can make a decision as to how they decide to, build their roster, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at the 49ers. Why are the 49ers in the Super Bowl? Because they have a quarterback that's on a rookie deal that's getting paid nothing because he was Mr. Irrelevant. The 49ers have, I think, 11 first-round picks on their roster, right? And then they have Brock. And so they were being able to build that. who's to say you should be paying your quarterback more than Christian McCaffrey, right? Whereas KC is built completely different, right? The quarterback is the highest paid guy on the team, and everything is different. So that's essentially what's going to happen. And for you guys and for us, it's going to be, well, what is this guy worth, right? Am I willing to give the first round pick or the number one recruit in the country X amount of dollars? And how does that affect my 85-man roster?
How valid is a certain services NIL? I guess they formulate the NIL and how much a player's worth. And I've heard that's been contention behind, like, some players look at that and they're like, okay, well, I'm worth this, and they go and they ask that. Have y'all ran across that? Like,
yeah, I mean,
services saying you're worth this
are,
much and this is not this.
Yeah, so I'll say it's On3, right? And their valuations are pretty far off in many instances. And the reality is that they are projecting both roster value and partner NIL value, but in many instances, their numbers are just not accurate. And the problem is that is really all that a student athlete has to go by, is this assumption of X. And I don't have anything against On3. I mean, it's better that that's out there than it isn't.
No, fair. Yeah, absolutely.
Those are not real numbers. And so that's why, like, the numbers that I released broadly earlier in December were designed not just for coaches, but for student athletes to be able to know, like, this is actually what is realistic. And one of the things that nobody talks about is how many kids that went in the portal that have nowhere right now to go. Right. And they went chasing NIL money and instead gave up an NIL or gave up a scholarship. And now we're in even a worse situation, which nobody really wants to talk about from that perspective. So we are doing our best. Transparency is important. I think we're headed towards that. And, you know, if you're an NFL player, you know what a free agent is worth, right? You know what your approximate value is, and you can make a decision on what matters. And maybe you're willing to play or take a pay cut so that you can play on a Super Bowl winning team, right? Yeah. That's all part of that conversation. And that's really what's happening at Oklahoma. And not to say that Oklahoma isn't deploying a lot of money, but more so that those student athletes on the roster want to play for something bigger. And I think there's a lot of value to that.
Now, Jason, it's been an exceedingly enlightening conversation.
Awesome.
We want to be respectful of your time. I have one last question to throw at you, and that is this, because you mentioned it pretty much right off the top, how strong Oklahoma's locker room culture is. And I know that another thing that many fans will say in response to that is, especially fans that are more inclined toward a doom and gloom type of outlook, they'll say, okay, sure, historically that has mattered in college football. Sure, historically that has had a payoff. That has been the foundation for championship teams. But there's no way that it's going to be the same foundation 5 years down the road as it might have been 10 years ago pre-NIL. What would you say in response to that? Accurate or holes in the logic?
It is maybe accurate today in the sense that when you have an uncapped system, it doesn't matter, or it matters less when there's no cap. But in a situation where there's parity and everyone gets to spend the same amount of money, then culture matters more than anything else. And the other thing that I'll say is that if money mattered more than anything else, why isn't it that the Yankees or the Mets don't win the championship every year? Right? Like, if you can just throw money at it, why doesn't it matter? And that's the reality of the situation. We see that all the time. And we see that in the NBA because you got a lot of personalities. And yeah, you only need one or two dudes, but if those dudes are prima donnas, you're done, right? You can have the biggest cap in the league and you can end up going 500. We see that pretty often. And so I think culture matters a lot. And don't forget, we're not dealing with, 30-year-old NBA and NFL players. We're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old kids. Like, these are kids often that don't maybe even have father figures in their life. And so if you want somebody to come in and play for you, you need to be able to do more than just pay them, right? Because most of these kids, they get paid. They don't even know what to do with the money. They don't even, you know, if you're making a couple of $100,000, where do you even spend that type of money in Norman? Like, and no offense, but it's like, what, and most of these, where are you spending that money in Tuscaloosa, right? Like, you can't even go into a store and buy a pair of sneakers for $700. There's no stores that sell that in Oklahoma. You're sitting on Amazon, right? Maybe you bought a car, but it's not like you're in Beverly Hills. Maybe if you're a USC and you can go find a place to spend that money. And so that's sort of the point. NIL is the greatest wealth redistribution in the history of the United States, next to Social Security and welfare. The vast majority of the money that Oklahoma football players are making is getting sent home. I have, in the last month, been a reference for 3 or 4 families who are now getting bigger apartments and houses in very depressed socioeconomic areas that these football players are from. And to me, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Kid is making X and he's sending that money home and he can buy his mom a bigger place to live in. That's where the money is going. So
they still get the stipend too. They get all that other stuff.
Yeah, they get their cost of attendance, they get their, and so, you know, for most of these kids, even 40 or 50 grand extra a year is life-changing money. It's a lot of money, right? And that's what you want. And again, like, everyone got $26,000 last year. It's not like, oh my God. The average FBS football player or P4 or 5 player last year made about $18,500 from a collective.
So OU was over the market value on average.
Yes, that's right. So it's not like, you know, and there were plenty of schools that were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars or giving a quarterback an $8 million contract and he played, you know, 20 snaps. So it's all about return on investment. And Oklahoma fans should feel good about where things are.
Yeah.
But in order to compete long term, we need folks involved. We need people to become members of the collective because every dollar counts, and it counts for Olympic sports too, right?
Yeah. And, okay, so that my last question for you is, you know, Gabe Eichert was on his show and it was talked about ad nausea on our board, you know, where he said, you know, the collective's hoping to put out, you know, 9 million, and that's across the board, even with the Olympics, correct? Is that kind of where that is? Is that what the roster, the football roster, because of the SEC, the jump? Do you expect that because they're in the SEC, that players going to, the value, I guess, goes up for what they're worth per position? Therefore, your roster value has to go up with it. Is that kind of what he was talking about? There's been some clarification that people have been wanting on that quote.
Crimson and Cream will deploy and position themselves to be in the top half of the SEC this year in total cash deployment for NIL.
There you go.
And we have every basketball player, every football player, and every softball player on their contract.
You got some good return with the basketball team so far compared to what they were last year.
Yeah, and they're very competitive. I mean, we have a top 25, top 30 pool.
Yep.
So they're performing in that range. Sure.
Yep.
But I could tell you top 10 schools are spending over 10 or spending over 2 million a year on just basketball.
Wow, that's crazy.
And we put out 4 for football last year. So you got 15 guys making 2 million or 85 guys making 4, right? Like, that's where it shows you where you have to be from perspective and what matters more. But in basketball, you get, again, 1 or 2 or 3 guys and you're good. With football, you need a much deeper roster.
And there are also plenty of schools on the basketball side that don't have a football program that they have to fund in addition.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Creighton, we work with Creighton. You look at Villanova, like those schools, Gonzaga, they can just go all in on basketball, and it just makes it easier to drive that revenue.
That's awesome. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is Jason Belzer, CEO of Student Athlete NIL. Thank you so much, man. This has been one of the most enlightening interviews we've had on our podcast.
Awesome. I appreciate it, and happy to come back on at any time. We're all about transparency. So I want to be open, and I want to make sure Sooner fans understand what we're working on, because we're doing this for them, right? Like, the results speak for themselves on the field.
So
appreciate it, Jason.
Fans, if you want to help out, donate. We'll have the link down there below on the YouTube for you guys to
and for for everybody that's listening on the audio side, Jason, how do people get involved with the Crimson and Cream Collective? Let them know.
Yeah, it's go to crimsonandcream.com or crimsonandcream.co. We have a membership drive that we are doing right now. We have a donor that stepped up, and he is, for every 250 new members, putting in $250,000. So like your money goes a long way, and your membership goes a long way. I don't even want you to donate. I just want you to become a member. Come in, $10 a month, and let us provide a valuable service back to you guys, and you can feel good. You can pick the sport you want it to go to, and you can get access to lots of really cool opportunities, memorabilia, all kinds of different things.
Thank you so much, Jason. All right, Jason Belzer, CEO, Student Athlete NIL. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.